If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the creepiest thing that you've ever experienced? One night when I was 11 years old, I was watching TV with my two older sisters, 13 and 15 at the time. Our parents were out late at a party, but being home alone was nothing new to us. Just before 1 a.m. our dog stood up and left the family room, and began to stare out the back door of the kitchen, just off the family room. A minute later he went absolutely crazy. It was not the typical barking sound, or the growling at a stranger, cat, etc. It was an insane mixture of incredibly loud barking and wild animal growling, the sound one would make in a truly life or death situation. This, of course, freaked the shit out of us. We went to our dog to comfort him, and after 20 seconds of discussion of what the duck was going on, we decided we had better secure the house as quickly as possible. It was a large house with many doors and windows to check. We all ran frantically to lock up everything as quickly as possible. The last door I got to was the garage door. A split second after locking it, I put my hand around the handle to verify it was locked, and felt someone from the other side viciously shaking the handle, pushing, trying to open the door. We of course made quite a few phone calls within the next few minutes. The memory of feeling that violent shaking, knowing the person my dog freaked out about, was 1 foot from me on the other side, creeps the shit out of me even now. True story, I work in the mental health professional and work with people who have severe mental disorders such as schizophrenia, etc. One of my patients who had a history of psychosis, seeing and hearing things that were not there, said he was being visited by a presence, a girl. We knew she didn't exist because he had no family or friends and was extremely isolated. We, the team, decided to have him take a picture of her, to challenge his delusion. We were shocked when he did bring a photo back, and horrified to see a hazy image of a girl hovering next to him in the picture. It was hazy and she had her ghost-like arms encircling him with long flowing hair. We examined in disbelief the photo. He had no photography skills and was not bright enough to Photoshop, etc. The pic was so eerie and legit. The psychiatrist, equally shocked, announced to him, "I can't help you with this, you need to see your pastor for this one." Freaky. When I was about 5, my family was visiting my grandparents, who lived in a duplex at that time. There were 2 doorbells and I ran up to the house and rang one of them. A creepy old lady, at that age, old people are creepy, answered the door to the downstairs, wrong apartment. I remember getting scared and running back to the car. Minus 20 years passes at Thanksgiving dinner. I'm telling my family how I was always scared to ring the doorbells in my grandparents' old apartment because I couldn't remember which one was the right one, and how I was always scared of the creepy old lady. Everybody got quiet, and then my mom explained that for the entire time I was alive, nobody had lived in that apartment. But the last tenant, who died there, looked just like I was describing. We were all creeped out and I still can't explain it. When I was 12, I was visiting my grandmother for her birthday. She lives in the middle of nowhere, typical farmhouse surrounded by woods. It's kind of creepy on its own, and definitely creepy at night. My family lived a good distance from her, so we decided to spend the night and drive back home in the morning. Like usual, I got stuck sleeping on the couch. In the middle of the night, I was awoke by the sound of something moving around the room. I didn't get up, but I opened my eyes to take a look. Across the room, about 10 to 12 feet away, stood an alien. It was a stereotypical alien, short, giant forehead, small chin. All I could see was the silhouette of his head in front of the window. He kept looking around, just standing there, surveying the room. Of course I was scared shitless and didn't do anything, but really, what could you do? It's a goddamned alien. Awaiting my inevitable abduction, I lay in bed, paralyzed. But he just stayed still, looking around, for what seemed to be forever. I decided to get a better look, so I very slowly sat up, trying to get a look at what he was up to. As I sat up, more of his body came into view, but where his neck should have been there was only a knot. Below that, string. It was a balloon, from my grandma's birthday party, swaying back and forth due to a vent somewhere. To this day, I've never felt a bigger sense of relief. When I was 7, my mom abandoned me at a bar and I had to walk home through the ghetto in the middle of the night. Some guy invited me in for cookies and I accepted. When I got in there, he put some porn on and started talking about how cute I was. I just ate the cookies, oblivious to what was going on, and then I walked right out. Then I witnessed the aftermath of a shooting, and I saw the paramedics putting this guy into an ambulance with blood everywhere. I got almost all the way home and the sun was just coming up when a cop saw me and started asking where my parents were. I was honest with him, because hey, he's a cop. What could possibly go wrong? And he wouldn't let me go home because my mom wasn't there. So he brought me to a police station and then I ended up in a foster home for a few weeks, not the first time, nor the last. So telling the cop the damn truth turned out to be a terrible idea. A friend of mine had died. A few days later I dreamt I was walking in an empty somber school hallway and saw someone emptying their locker. I got closer and saw it was my friend. I asked him what was going on. He said he had to spend some time in this place, Limbo? Purgatory? For 40 days. I noticed a clock in his locker that had 3:20 as the time. He said when I see the clock at that time again, I'll know that he'll have moved on. A few weeks later I got woken up by the crack of some loud thunder. I opened my eyes and my clock said 3:20. I remembered my old dream and got up and went to the kitchen to check the calendar. He had died 42 days previous. Maybe an odd coincidence, but I still think it was kind of freaky. I suffer from sleep paralysis, which is much rarer to me now than when I was younger. One night, I woke up with an immense feeling of dread. I wanted to scream or shout, but couldn't move. Slowly, I came around and was able to just barely move my right arm. As I brought it over my chest, I feel something surprising. Fumbling over it with my right hand, I began to feel hair, and as my hand glided over it, I realized it was an arm, but not mine. I tried to pick it up, but it was heavy and I could not move it. I shit bricks. I cannot accurately describe the feeling of waking up to a foreign, hairy arm weighing me down in the middle of the night. It turns out, it was my own arm. But it was asleep so it didn't feel my hand rubbing it, but my hand surely felt the arm so I didn't recognize it as my own. Compounded with the fear and paranoia of sleep paralysis, this was by far the most unpleasant thing I've ever, and may ever, experience. I once lived alone in a historic, Victorian-style neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. I don't scare easy. And I don't say that to sound tough. I really just don't scare easy. I take showers in the dark because it's more relaxing, for example. My wife thinks that is ducking weird. Anyway, I lived in a duplex, a one-time large house converted into 4 separate apartments. I lived in one of the upper apartments. Jumping ahead to what actually happened, now. There was an old lady that lived very close, in a house that shared the same parking as I. She was a really nice lady. Often, I would help her bring her groceries in. Give her rides to her daughter's house. I would even help her fix things around her house. Every time that this lady would ask for my help, she would call me on my cell phone. I gave her my number when I first met her and told her if you need any help ever, just call me and I'll be right over. She would call almost daily, and it never bugged me one bit. She was a sweet lady and I was more than happy to help. Jumping ahead here. It had been 3 days that I hadn't heard from, or seen her. I got very concerned because I would see her every day sitting on her porch drinking coffee. I shrugged it off at first and thought to myself when I come home from work, I'm going to call the police if she doesn't answer her door. So, I come home from work. I step into my apartment and drop my things on the counter. Put my jacket away. Pop open a beer. That's when I hear somewhat of a ruckus outside. I step outside just as I see a police cruiser and another blackish vehicle parked in front of this lady's house. I pause for a moment. Then I see them carrying her body, wrapped in a white sheet from the upper floor of her house. My chest tightened and I started to sob uncontrollably. And, this is where the creepiness begins. That evening, I am sitting on my terrace, outside that faces this lady's house. Having a beer. Just relaxing really. I didn't really before this. But I glance over toward her house. Specifically, at the door where her body was carried out. This exact instant of locking eye contact on this door, I see the curtain in the window closest to the door move. I instantly get the coldest shivers up my spine. It doesn't stop there. In the next few moments, I am scared to death and relieved. I get call on my phone. It is the lady's number on my caller ID. WTF. I answer. Hello? A pause, I hear somebody breathing. Thank you, a female's voice says. It is her daughter. She is at the house helping clean up the mess left behind in result of this woman's death. She was thanking me because she knew how much and how often I cared for her mom. Eventually, I was able to retrieve my balls from my throat, and realize that a dead woman wasn't trolling me. But, for those 10 seconds or so, I was petrified. When I was 14 I was laying in bed one night. Me and my brother shared a room, but he was asleep when this happened. I'd have known if he'd gotten out of bed, as the springs on our beds at the time made a very noticeable, prolonged creaking noise as you got in or out of bed. Anyway, I was trying to nod off when I became aware that I felt there was someone else in the room. Just being a kid I didn't turn to see who this sudden presence was, I was just scared and baffled. As I lay there, laying on my left side. Within a few minutes there came from behind me in the room a very quiet dragging sound, like the hem of a long dress moving over the carpet. By this point I was drenched in sweat but too scared to move or pull back the covers. Nobody had come into the room, and it wasn't my brother doing this. I was almost totally paralyzed with fear. Shortly after that I heard a thud noise from the bookshelves. Just like that, like the sound a rubber ball would make if it were bounced on the shelves twice, and then stopped. I just lay there, scared shitless, and eventually forced myself to go to sleep. The experience never repeated itself. And I haven't had any similar experiences since. It's a pity, as now as a grown man I'd be startled by the same experience, but brave enough to at least look to find out what the hell was going on. I endured a pretty terrifying night that I still cannot explain. This all occurred on one 4th of July evening, when I was around the age of 6. It was very humid out and I was already creeped out because I was home alone. Dad died when I was young, mom worked nights, siblings did their own thing. For whatever reason, I decided to cocoon inside of a comforter on the living room sofa. I was getting close to falling asleep when I heard a loud thud hit the living room window, which was 2 stories high on our house. I got up, looked out the window, and saw nothing. I started attributing the sound to a bird flying into the window, which wasn't uncommon. At the same time, I began hearing the sound of the chairs in the kitchen moving across the floor. It was a very distinct wood scratching across tile sound. I called out for my older brother, thinking that it was him, and received no answer. I grabbed the nearest weapon, my shoe. Because shoes make great weapons for 6-year-olds, and began walking towards the kitchen, despite being completely scarred shitless. I examined the kitchen and found nothing. Just as I had turned away to walk out of the kitchen, one of the chairs was pushed across the floor towards me and stopped just enough to nudge my posterior. At this point, I totally flipped shit. I ran across the house and locked myself in a closet. I think I stayed in there for 5 hours until my mom came home from work. I have been told that it was a poltergeist, but I'm not a believer of ghosts, spirits, and etc. I still have zero explanation about what happened. Other than that, I've experienced sleep paralysis a few times. I witnessed an object thrown several feet with no apparent cause, and I watched a guy on acid have a bad trip while listening to Hamburger Lady by Throbbing Gristle. He was 100% sure that he was being sucked into the speakers. That was terrifying. When I was 7, my father went on business out of state for a week. While away, he was involved in a car accident which put him into a coma for 2 weeks. During that time I would see flashes of him wandering around the house looking confused, and if he looked in my direction or someone walked around him, he wouldn't even react. Granted, these flashes were only 1 to 2 seconds tops, usually less. I would tell my mom every time I saw him and she brushed it off as me missing my dad. When he came out of the coma, my mom told him about all my sightings. When she was done explaining my behavior, Dad asked me to leave the room, and that was the last I heard about it until I was 18, leaving for college. Before heading out, they sat me down and told me that the only thing my dad remembered while being in the coma was wandering around our house and trying to figure out why it was empty and looking for everyone. He said he would randomly see me flash in and out and described exactly how I would see him for a split second. Maybe not ultra creepy, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Went out back for a late night cigarette one summer night. Heard deliberate slow footsteps cracking gravel coming from the corner of the house, 8 feet away. I froze in terror and watched the corner to see a man slowly creep forward until half of him was visible. The second seemed like forever and I had so much adrenaline my heart was pounding in my ears. As slowly as he appeared, he disappeared back behind the corner and I heard no more movement. Ran inside, locked doors, closed windows, called cops about a man creeping around. They show up and there's no sign of him. 2 nights later, a man came around the same corner at night towards my girlfriend and her friends while jerking off. They made it inside and called the cops, but he was gone again. A week later they caught the man known as the campus rapist a block away, jerking off between houses while looking in windows. When I was a kid, my sister always loved playing with dolls, but I was terrified of them. There was this one that would sing a song when you pressed a button on its back. It only had like 3 to 4 songs it could sing, and it would cycle through them so you knew what song it would sing next. Well, shortly she got it. It had been lost in some random pile of junk around the house. A year later, she found it again and tried to make it sing, but when it started singing it was in a really distorted voice, so she figured it was running out of batteries. She found me and let me hear one of the songs, and I was slightly disturbed by it but not legitimately scared. We then found my mom and my sister asked her for new batteries. When demonstrating the distortion to my mom, the sound clip completely died out halfway through. We attributed this to the batteries losing the little juice they had left. When opening the battery case though, my mom accidentally hit the button, and it started singing in the same distorted voice as it had before, except this time it was a slow version of Jimmy Crack Corn, which it had never sung before. It wouldn't stop until we took out the batteries. Afterwards we checked the instruction manual that came with it, and it confirmed that Jimmy Crack Corn was not one of the songs it sang. Being young and already scared by dolls, this was the scariest thing ever. When I was about 10 or so, we moved to a house in a small town that backed up to a cemetery. One night, we were coming back from something, and as we get out of the car in the driveway, Dad sees a light back in the far corner of the cemetery. He decides to go back and see what's going on, as this is obviously not normal. I follow him back through our yard, and the closer we get, I'm starting to freak the duck out. We get back to the back of our yard and start walking through the cemetery, and we can see there are 3 or 4 people around a lantern. I'm having a mild heart attack at this point, but out of a sense of duty, I'm following my dad to my own doom. As we get a little closer, I see one of the people pick up a shovel and start digging. That was all my fragile mind could handle. In my greatest moment of shame in life thus far, without saying a word, I turned and ran like a pussy, leaving my dad to his own fate. I get back to the house and wait for Dad to get back, or not, as the case may be. About 10 minutes later, he comes back in the house all smiling as he was talking to a few high school kids who were filming a scene from Tom Sawyer for an English project. I was at our cabin on a lake when I was about 10, and I was told to walk up to the road to meet the rest of the people coming out for the night. Normally the walk takes no more than 10 minutes, and if you get off the path you'll hit the road in about the same time. But I walked for about 20 minutes and realized I didn't know where I was, so I decided to backtrack until I hit the lake and then could follow the coast back to the cabin. After about 5 minutes the trees were clearing and I started to relax. That was until I realized I was at the road, but approaching it from the opposite side. I have no recollection of crossing the road, and I also didn't recognize that section of road. So at this point I had been walking about 20 minutes I guess, so I start walking back up the road, which took me about half hour to get back. I've never been able to make any sense of what happened. The dorm that I stayed in during my freshman year of college was on the 13th floor of what was once a hotel. Before school even started and before I moved into my dorm, I had heard stories about the ghost that haunts the building. He is affectionately called the Shuffler, and his signature is a traveling sound similar to shuffling feet/hands sliding along your walls. A few months after I had finally moved in and got settled, everyone had had their experience with the Shuffler, nothing too horrifying, but unsettling nonetheless. One night at about 4 in the morning, my roommate, her girlfriend and I all woke up to the sound of our huge freestanding metal closet banging violently for short periods of time over and over again, sounded similar to repeatedly slamming a filing cabinet shut. We frantically closed the window and turned off the fan in hopes that the banging was caused by a draft or possibly changes in the air pressure. It happened for another half hour and we finally called our CF, community facilitator, basically just an RA. She came in with a high-heeled shoe ready to stab the rodent or creature that was trying to get out. By now we were all screaming so loudly that most of the kids in my hall were cuddled under our blankets on our beds watching the madness. One of the kids was crying and crossing himself. The door was finally opened and nothing came out, so we all kind of sighed and forgot about it. A few minutes later, after the door was closed again, we heard the banging once more and everyone immediately ran out of the room, leaving me, my CF, who has been putting up with this for 2 years already and claims to have the power to tell the Shuffler to leave, my roommate, and her girlfriend to deal with this shit. I finally had the brilliant idea to duct tape the door closed and put a little post-it note with a cross on it, making fun of the situation so I could maybe be able to fall asleep in that room again. We all turned off the lights, closed our eyes, and the banging continued. I turned my light back on, and for the first time actually saw the movement happening. The tape was wiggling, the door handle was moving, and the stuff we had stacked on top of the cabinet was sliding around a little bit. After that, the Shuffler jokes were no longer funny and I never once slept in that room by myself without the light and TV on ever again. It also took a lot of courage to look in my bathroom mirror thinking that I would see him standing behind me. Okay, this one time about 5 years ago a friend and I were upstairs in my house gaming. We were home alone as we usually were. We were around 14 to 15 and for being cool tough kids we were both pussies. I have had a number of weird things happen to me in my life, so I always have a knife in my room. So anyway, we're gaming and it's storming outside. Tons of rain and thunder and shit. All of a sudden in the middle of a game of Madden I hear the door of my house open and start slamming viciously. My house is old as duck, so the door is really tough to close and just as tough to open. So my door is slamming and slamming and slamming and finally it shuts. So I am upstairs clutching my knife and my friend is behind me, and we are both starting to freak out. I phone my mom and she isn't home and I tell her what happens and she says I'm coming and hangs up. It sounded surprisingly scary. So I see the lights of my mom's car pull down the driveway. I forgot to mention but I live on a farm. So with knife in hand I go downstairs and me and my friend and my mom look and my kitchen and living room are covered in muddy footprints. They are human-sized in shape but with 4 toes. It's like a guy with 4 toes was walking around my house barefoot. And we follow these footprints and they get to this old armoire we bought from the old farm church when it shut down and they just stopped. There were footprints leading into and around the house that just stopped and never left. I have been ducking shitting bricks ever since. My friend and I still wonder what the duck was in my house that day. In high school in Mesa, Arizona, there was a mansion that was rumored to be haunted. It was built in the back of a neighborhood surrounded by citrus trees with fully paved roads but not a single other house built. I'd gone there in big groups, 20 plus people, and there was always an eerie feeling, but nothing specific happened, although a girl broke her arm there once, but that's a different story. One night we were bored and decided to go with only 6 of us. The house was in the middle of a giant island in the middle of a cul-de-sac, so we parked in back to hide our car. We walked through the citrus trees toward the house and soon heard rustling in the trees behind us. I kept turning around to see if someone was following us, and finally saw it was a few javelinas. They aren't very aggressive, but it definitely spooked us. So, we get to the house and there is a light on inside. We've never seen a light on, so 4 of the 6 refuse to get any close, but 2 of us sneak up and look in the window. The first windows we look in, the lights are off, but light is spilling in from the next room over, so we sneak to the next window and peek in. The lights were off in this room too, but light was spilling in from the room we had just looked at. We ended up circling the house and could not find the origin of the light or evidence of anything inside. We talked the others into going into the backyard and sitting by the pool and telling ghost stories. After a few stories, on the other side of the pool, there was a 1950s style radio. When we had been there in larger groups, we would always try to get it to turn on, but never could. In the middle of my friend's story, the radio turned on to static. We all turned and looked at the radio for about 10 seconds and then it turned off again. By this time we were seriously spooked and decided to leave. As we walked through the backyard to the citrus trees, we walked up to the racquetball court. It was halfway buried in the ground and there were stairs up to the roof, which was about 8 feet off the ground. We walked up and looked over the orange groves to see our car on the other side. One of my friends turned to look at the house and suddenly froze. "Do not turn around," he said. Of course we all turned around to face the house. I couldn't see anything. "What?" I asked. "Look in the house," he said. On the first floor facing the pool were 2 glass French doors and standing inside was the dark silhouette of a man looking at us. He didn't move, just stood there watching us. We counted to 5 and all jumped off the roof and ran through the orange trees to our car. To this day, I have no idea what that was in the door. I doubt anyone will be reading this, but I'd like to let it be known. So me and a good friend are watching my girlfriend's house. She has 2 dogs and we decided to stay there. It was only gonna be like 5 days, so no big deal. So we pretty much did nothing the first day. We ate top ramen and watched the Science Channel. We are pretty cool, I know. The house is pretty creepy. It's an older house and it used to be an old speakeasy. It burned down a long time ago and it was rebuilt to be the current house there. I don't know if that's true. It quite possibly could be my girlfriend's dad ducking with me. But what I do know is while I was asleep, my friend woke me up and asked if I turned the oven on. Apparently it turned itself on. Happened several times through the week and we were rightfully freaked the duck out. So one day I had to go home and do some stuff around my house, so I left him at the house alone. I soon got desperate texts that the dogs were freaking the duck out and he heard heavy footsteps upstairs. Now I thought he was just milking it and being a dick and trying to mess with me, but the next day he left to go out with his girlfriend and the same shit happened to me. But I was upstairs in the shower, and I heard clear heavy footsteps, no one was home, and the dogs were freaking the duck out downstairs. I literally stayed in the shower for 30 minutes to build up the courage to check the house. I've told my girlfriend, she claims it's the mice in the house. If so, these mice weigh well over 100 pounds. These were some heavy-ass footsteps, similar to a man with boots on. True story. So when I was 19 I went to visit a buddy of mine in Ohio. His house was pretty nice, but definitely had some age to it. John, my buddy, informs me that the house had been built in the early to mid-1800s as a farmhouse, had had many changes to it, and finally his grandparents had bought it in the 70s. Okay, so, the first night John takes me to my room, which used to be his degenerate drug-using and abusive brother's before he was arrested, which was maybe 15x15. A pretty normal size room and no windows whatsoever. I noticed that this room was freezing cold, about 10 degrees less than the rest of the house for good reason too. Read below. I get into bed around midnight, and quickly fall asleep. I wake up at 2 a.m. to my door swinging wide open and slamming into the wall. I was scared shitless to say the least, but let it pass, thinking it's an old house and had to have had drafts coming into it. I leave the door open and go back to bed without any other problems. The next morning I tell John and his grandmother about what had happened, and they both turn white and immediately start to apologize. They told me how the house was used during the Underground Railroad, that there was an escape hatch/hiding hole under my bed, source of cold air, and that there had been many other incidents that had happened at the house, but that I shouldn't worry as it'll go away and was harmless. At this point I'm a nervous wreck. John shows me the hatch, and sure enough it's there, as well as this small hole in the ground for hiding shit/people. He tells me of all these incidents he had had as a child, someone knocking on the walls where doors used to be, people walking through walls, coming home to find the dishes done. This shit made me laugh and I really didn't believe it, but his grandmother and cousins all swear to it. Small items becoming misplaced and found in random corners of the house, etc. After hearing his grandmother tell me that no harm is ever done to anyone, I let it slide. I have no problem sleeping the second and third night, but on the fourth and final night everything goes to hell. So John and I decide to watch a movie. We get about 2/3 of the way through it and I swear I see a guy walk right in front of me and go through the wall. John confirms that he had seen it too and not to worry, that it's called a residual haunt, like a movie playing over and over again. The same things happens over and over again, and this thing was a guy walking through a frickin' wall right in front of the TV. Once again, with a little bit of comforting of my friend, I let it slide. So I crawl into bed and quickly fall asleep. Around 2 a.m. my goddamn door flies open again. My heart rate quickens, I get under the covers, and begin to listen. I can hear someone walking around my bed. I shit you not, the floor starts to creak wood floors, on the right side. Footsteps go to the foot of my bed, and then around to the left side. I'm shaking with fear as this is freaking me out. Hoping that whatever it is will leave me alone, I stay still. About 2 minutes pass by and I haven't heard anything. So I start to calm down. Until someone starts to tickle the back of my ducking neck. It felt like 2 fingers wiggling back and forth where my skull meets my neck. I shoot out of bed, never look back, and run up to my friend's room. I wake him up, tell him the story, and he just starts laughing. I'm livid pissed at him now, but he tells me a story of how his brother, who at the time was 25, had the exact same thing happen to him. I guess this entity or whatnot really hated his degenerate brother and most likely thought I was him. I was happy to get on the plane to Denver the next morning. Slept the entire flight. Looking back now I laugh at it, but my god did it creep me out at the time. I think I was 17, and picked up my, then, high school girlfriend for a relatively routine date. We lived in a small rural town, so we went to the movies and were going to stop and get dessert at a local restaurant. But when we got there apparently they had changed their hours and closed earlier than expected. Well, since she had told her parents we were going to get something to eat after the movie and we weren't going to be home until late, we had time to kill. So I start driving towards her house, but like every high school couple we decided to find a field to pull off into. And hook up. I'm not that familiar with the country roads by her house, so she starts giving directions. And within 10 minutes we're in absolute farm country in the middle of the night, around 12:30 to 1 a.m., with dirt roads, fields with an occasional farmhouse etc. While I turn off of a gravel road onto a rough dirt road with complete tree coverage overhead, so it's absolutely pitch black with the occasional light of the moon shining through the tree branches above. Well, a few seconds after I turn onto this road, I see a set of headlights in the mirror from an old red truck, pretty far behind my car. I think to myself, that's odd, we haven't passed a car in well over 20 minutes and I don't remember seeing any other cars when I turned. But I just brush it off, thinking more about the girl than the truck. As I'm driving down the road, the headlights have caught up and in a matter of no time, he's right behind me. So I try not to act alarmed, she hasn't noticed the truck yet, and I haven't said anything. As we continue down this road, the truck drives right up behind my bumper and starts swerving back and forth behind my car and revving the engine. By now she's noticed the truck too, and is somewhat alarmed. Trying to be the macho guy, I'm thinking he just wants to pass. I don't want to stop in the middle of nowhere, so I casually pull as far over to the side as I can, while I continue down the road. This is where shit goes bad. I look back up into my rearview mirror and the lights are gone. I'm relieved and we both breathe a sigh of relief. He must have turned off behind us somewhere, so we continue on our way on this already scary ass road. Until we hit a clearing in the trees overhead, and the overcast of the moon makes the road somewhat more visible. I look up in my mirror and all I can see is the moonlight reflect off the chrome of a truck grill right behind the trunk of my car. I say something to the effect of, "What the duck?" And she looks in the side mirror and sees that the truck had just turned off his lights a while back and is now following right behind my car. She begins to freak the hell out. I hit the gas and start trying to get to the end of this desolate road. I'm flying down the road as fast as possible, and see the truck has realized what I'm doing and flicks on his headlights and comes barreling to catch up with us. I come up to a stop sign and, not knowing where the hell I am, just start making turns down every road I can. With the truck right behind my car, I start making every turn I can. I have a rough idea of how to get back to the main roads, and I can see the truck has turned out his lights again and is still right on our tail. I finally come to a street I recognize and get to the main road. Somewhere in the confusion, the truck quit following us. Where? I have no clue. But I was forever scared to drive to the country roads beyond her house again. She told her parents, and apparently there were police reports of a guy in a red pickup truck following people at night, but he hadn't been doing it in years. When I was about 17, I still lived with my parents. The house was 2 stories plus a walkout basement and a sub-basement. My dad has always slept on the living room couch because he snores so loud, while my mom sleeps on the top floor in her own room, and I slept in my own room across the hall from hers. Now, my dad's snoring is something we all were used to, and something we always woke up to if we noticed it had stopped: undiagnosed sleep apnea. Anytime I woke up at night, I'd immediately listen for him and either go back to bed when he snored again or go throw a pillow at him so he'd wake up and breathe. When my mom did this, she would just stand in the hall and listen for him and either throw a pillow or go back to bed. Anyway, one night I awoke to someone standing in the hall outside my door. Believing it was my mom, I pretended to be asleep and listened for my dad. Then I realized he'd been snoring for several seconds. As the figure in the hall walked into my room, I, half asleep, decided it was my mom checking on me like she used to when I was little, or just her sleepwalking. My mom sleepwalks, I have narcolepsy, and my dad has sleep apnea. Weird night happenings are semi-common for us. The figure eventually left and I drifted into slumber. The next morning, my mom, who seemed concerned, asked me why I stood at the foot of her bed last night for so long. After explaining my experience, we both sort of laughed it off as sleepwalking or weird dreams. Skip forward a few weeks, my mom decides to open her window, which is right above her craft desk covered in craft junk. Not only was the window unlocked, but the screen was missing. Since her window is a story off the ground and the only window on that side of the house, she just assumed my dad had done it. When she asked him, he denied it and decided to investigate. He owns a windows and siding company and couldn't understand how the screen just fell off. When he stuck his head out to take a peek, it became clear someone had entered from the outside using something that scraped all the paint from around the window. Somehow they'd managed not to knock a thing off her desk while climbing in, and they apparently didn't wake the dogs, set off the sensor light, or steal anything. We cried a little when we put it all together. Creepy. When I was in 9th grade, I had signed up for a ski trip. I was a novice skier at the time, not knowing too much about what I was doing. Went off a couple of jumps until I ended up breaking my arm. Fast forward to the hospital. My gym teacher had taken me in her van that she had driven up just in case something like this did happen. When I was in the hospital, the doctors made it clear that they were going to attempt to reset my arm. I was given a sedative and went into a whole different world. My mind was in a state where I knew I was in the hospital, but at the same time I was out of my body in a series of events. These events were all horrifying. From what I can recall, the first event was me sitting in a chair with crazy men around me laughing and taunting me. The events would rapidly change. One specific event I remember was me lying down, not being able to move, with people attacking me violently, beating me from head to toe. But during all of this I knew I was still in the hospital, but these events seemed so realistic. The creepiest part of all of this was me waking up to the doctor looking directly into my eyes, screaming to me, "Are you okay?" I had no idea what I was doing while I was under the medication, but I can guess that I was either freaking out or possibly unconscious. I am not too sure. I did not say anything because of the medicine had me out of it, and I felt extremely uncomfortable. The person I knew the most was simply a gym teacher that I might have talked to twice before all of this. Finally my parents arrived and I felt safe. This was truly the freakiest moment of my life, and this story sounds crazy, but you have to live it to know what I went through. Before I die, I hope I can recall all the events that happened to me. To this day I cannot recall what happened exactly, but I know I have been different ever since. About 3 years ago, I was sleeping in my apartment in Berkeley on a Wednesday night. I used to rent a little studio by myself on Frat Row that was annoyingly loud for me because I am a really light sleeper. I don't know why, but just about any noise above background wakes me up. I actually sleep with my computer on just for white noise. So this night was pretty much just like any other night. I ate dinner around 7:30 p.m., did some HW and went to sleep by about midnight. My apartment was basically a square where you could imagine the door at the top right, my desk in the top left, and my bed in the bottom left. I slept so that my head was against the wall and my eyes toward the door. The door opened in, with the hinge on the left so that the open door sort of obscured the view into the left side of the apartment. When open, from the outside it basically blocked my bed from view. At about 3:30 a.m. I woke up suddenly to see that my door was slowly swinging open. My first thought was that the wind must have blown it open. Then I remembered that I lived inside an apartment building with locked doors and no wind. I reached for the knife I keep by my bed, but sure enough, the one time I needed it in a hurry, I couldn't find it. It felt like an eternity, but I reached for it again, still didn't get. I took a breath and reached for it a third time, and again I didn't find it. At this point the door was completely open, and had been for maybe a second or two. I decided I didn't have any more time to look for the knife, and I got up as quickly but quietly as I could, ran up to my desk and then along the wall to my door. As the guy was just starting to sort of sneak in, I threw all of my momentum into the back side of the door. The guy got crunched about his one leg and belly, then backed out into the hallway. I slammed the door shut, locked it, deadbolt plus doorknob, and looked through the peephole. I saw this tallish white guy wearing a Raiders jersey and dark green jacket, looking right back at me. He seemed to be completely cool, not freaking out the way I was. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a fat key ring, picked out a key, put the key in my deadbolt and unducking locked it. He then picked out another key, put it into my doorknob and started to unlock my doorknob. I grabbed the doorknob and held it as tight as I could so that it wouldn't turn. He tried for about 30 seconds, by which time I started yelling that I had called the cops, BS, and that they would be here any minute. That finally made him bolt. I then had a second to get a phone and call the cops. Cops arrived, did their thing, found nothing. Never caught the guy. Told me that I got extremely lucky and that I did the right thing to stop him from entering. They said that if I didn't wake up and act when I did, things might have turned out really bad. After all, he didn't seem to care that you were awake inside the apartment. He tried to get back in. Obviously, he had a plan on how to deal with you, once inside.